Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, we'll be discussing my thoughts on episode 18 of the anime series ClassicaLoid. And oh man, did I call it or did I call it? I really, I was speaking about this in the last couple of episode discussion videos and the comments as well, that I really kind of wanted the show to get back to the main sort of plot line, the enigmatic nature of Kanai's father, the mystery of what Bach-sama was after, all of that kind of stuff, why the ClassicaLoids were created, what they were exactly, all this stuff. And man, if we aren't dead to rights back on top of that in this episode, mostly revolving around Kanai's father's former partner / right-hand woman, Mitsuru, who has been working with Bach-sama, and it turns out she has tried to sort of create an answer to the ClassicaLoids, which have run amok in the form of this Mitsuru-loid. Say that 3 times fast. It's interesting how Kanai's father calls them the ClassicaLoids because they are classical composers all. And here she titles this AI sort of robot Mitsuru-loid, after herself. But it's kind of an AI robotic hybridization of the virtual Archidol app, which we saw Chopin sort of recreating his love interest in his former life. If these are in fact clones, we should say the original Chopin's life and everything like that, and a very heartening episode that was. Well, here we have a sort of bastardization, arguably, of that Mitsuru is trying to answer to Bach-sama's need to capture those 8 sounds. And much as I speculated, if you count how many ClassicaLoids there are, including Bach, you've got Bach-sama, that's 1. 2 is Beethoven, 3 is Mozart, 4 is Chopin, 5 is Schubert, 6 is Liszt. We have Tchaikovsky and Berezowska making 7 and 8 respectively. Those are the 8 sounds that Bach-sama in the flashback, as we're seeing, because of course Kanai's father is heavily involved in this episode, are we finding out that Bach had realized after using and summoning his music to take control of this particular arc agency, he had gone effectively to Kanai's father and said, look, I don't want to manipulate you into helping me capture these 8 sounds, realize that dream, whatever that amounts to being, whatever the purposes behind that are, remain to be seen, whether nefarious or benevolent. And that's something I've long speculated ever since the very early going of this series. What could Bach actually be after? But for whatever reason, Kanai's father is kind of, he asks him, can I take some time to think about this? This is a very big decision. I can't just walk into it. And he ends up, this is what causes him to spirit away with Beethoven and Mozart. It's the only 2 ClassicaLoids he as yet wakes up, although we do see Schubert is up, hearkening back to his own memories of seeing, somebody spiriting away with Beethoven and Mozart in the middle of the night, and alarms are blaring, and we have a recaptured version of this in this episode that we see Bach-sama is very much aware of what's going on. And so Kanai's father has been missing and in hiding for a reason. It's because of this, whatever this is that Bach-sama wants to see realized. He needs, in a manner of speaking, Kanai's father to play a role, play a part in that. And Kanai's father is very reluctant, and he doesn't want to be a part of it for whatever reason. Maybe he knows more than we as yet do as to whether this is nefarious or benevolent. He may suspect it's nefarious. He may not like the idea of the perversion of the sort of, mystical, magical effects that the music has. But something that answered right to my speculation that all the wackiness that has ensued in the last few episodes, the purification of that, turning the ClassicaLoids into plants, the humanitarian nature that was brought forth in Beethoven when he and Mozart were on the lam and became part of that farming community, as we see in this episode when the ClassicaLoids are, for all intents and purposes, confronted with this Mitsuru-loid version of Sosuke, as we find, they summon their music, and some of the other ClassicaLoids are saying, well, maybe it's a fluke, but Mozart and Beethoven, they are both manipulating this to the fullest extent like they've never done before. They've managed to evolve and summon forth their music, and they're doing it with a purpose rather than just doing it on the spur of the moment at random, as has been given, every time they've done it previously in this series thus far. So we've seen them evolve. We've seen them, attain a higher level, a higher form of this. They've kind of gone Dragon Ball Z on the music. I find that absolutely fascinating, and I'm so happy that it answered to that speculation. It did, of course, bring about Bach-sama's own music to quash them again. He's still the all-powerful ClassicaLoid, and with good reason. I mean, when Mitsuru gets her way, she ends up having these like ninjas, the same kind of guys who were going after Kanai's father to begin with, and getting caught up in his wacky, wild scientific traps and everything, gum or glue all over the floor, and he manages to get away again. It looks like he's hiding out in Africa, by the way, or something like that, which, if I'm remembering correctly, didn't Schubert, like via balloon or something like that, end up landing in Africa? I wonder if they ran into each other at all, if that was in fact the case, if memory serves. But it's just interesting to me that in trying to attain this level of perfection and trying to answer to the just discombobulated nature of the ClassicaLoids, Mitsuru has created this android robot and kidnapped, inadvertently, but for all intents and purposes, Sosuke, who is carrying around Pad-kun. He's like mulling over his life and his lack of musical talent and whatever like that. And this is because he's speaking about music in a way that these dunces think he must be a musician. He must know what he's talking about. So this was the mandate from Mitsuru, bring someone back who is a musician. And by having him perform his horrible, no good, very bad music, this song about how loathsome he is, that I suck melody, which, by the way, for the last half an hour after watching the episode, while I was making the thumbnail for this video, prior to recording, it was stuck in my head. That ballad is stuck in my head over and over again. So there is some melodic nature to it. Sosuke's self-reprimanding song. As horrible as this song is, it still instills a level of awareness in the Mitsuruloid, and it takes on his persona. The next we see of this robot, it's a robot version, for all intents and purposes, of him, of Sosuke, down to the outfit he's wearing. The face is still very much a robot face, and it's like that absurdity comes to the fore again because nobody recognizes this is a robot. Nobody recognizes this is not the flesh and blood Sosuke at all. I figured it was a given for the ClassicaLoids, like they're all kind of out there anyway, even if they have been purified, even if they're closer to attaining whatever it is Bach-sama is after. I had a feeling, just for absurdity's sake, just for the sake of the humor, of course they're not going to, recognize who he is, understand that this is a robot, all this kind of stuff. They're bitching at him because he came back empty-handed when they had all these, groceries and errands they wanted him to run and perform for them. And so he goes out and he does it, and they're all praising the robot and everything like that. And then you have Kanai come in. And this is where I had to sort of, suspend my disbelief, because Kanai didn't recognize this as a robot. And I started to wonder, I started to formulate in my head, is Kanai even really a human? Could she be a ClassicaLoid? This is something I actually had discussions back and forth with one of you guys in the comments a few episodes back now, where I was speculating, what's up with Kanai? There are aspects of Kanai's nature that are just a little bit off as well. I mean, you could say that about any of the characters, really, even Sosuke. He's by no means the straight man to the band of crazies that are the ClassicaLoids. But Kanai even, she is looking straight at this robot, straight in the eyes, the mechanical eyes, and the vocoder voice box and everything like that, which ends up being, as it opens, there's like a laser beam thing that can fire out of it or whatever, or a sonic beam. But she has no recognition that this is a frickin' robot? What the hell is wrong with this chick? And, of course, Mitsuru is back in her office looking over her computers and watching a sort of eavesdropping camera footage that is linked to the eyes of this Mitsuruloid, and she's like, wow, this kid must have had like no presence in this house amongst these others for them to not recognize it. again, the ClassicaLoids are a given. They're kind of dunces in their own right, as classical as they are, as miraculous as they are, hearkening back to the composers of old and all of that. They're a wacky bunch of characters. So of course they don't care about Sosuke enough to recognize them, or even know really what a robot, I guess, is. They probably haven't seen one. And it's kind of hilarious to me that all of this madness coincides with the miraculous nature of Bach-sama, who in this, particular episode, we are finding this cat has mad talent. For him to be able to go out, which is his wont, to every once in a while sort of go out on his own and just traverse the town on foot. And every little thing that he perceives, every sound, from the clacking keys of a keyboard on a, computer that some guy is using in a cafe, to the melodic bird song in the trees above, to children laughing and playing and singing to themselves. All of these things create a music rhythm in his mind. And he can thus compose beautiful masterworks of music that may or may not be related to his musique, or be intended to be used, for those purposes at some means to some end. And just seeing him doing that, seeing him sitting in a park and listening to all these things, having taken all these sounds in and smiling to himself, very satisfied that he's creating something artistic, something beautiful and miraculous, was kind of astounding. It was very poignant to really have that brought to the fore the way it was. And then, of course, he realizes he's sitting on wet paint on the bench that he's sitting on, and he gets up, and the back of his suit jacket and the back of his trousers rip off. And I'm like, I was almost half wondering, did it take the underwear with it? Like we're going to see Bach buns. But so he sees that there's this guy who's absolutely hot on the summer day or whatever it is, wearing this Gyouna-kun sort of gyoza-based mascot, I guess. I can't remember if we've seen this sort of mascot before in the series, but I know he's in the OP. We see Sosuke having a little plushie sort of version of this Gyouna-kun. And Bach-sama, I guess he just makes off with the guy's costume because he's embarrassed. So now he's roving around while the Mitsuruloid version of Sosuke is back at, the manor house. He's roving around, and he runs into Motes because he's, of course, in a costume. Motes loves costumes. All this stuff, and you have Bach-sama being completely hounded by kids and just trying to get away from everybody, trying to get back to the ARC agency building, all this stuff, and just havoc is then ensuing back at the manor house when something, I guess they're running this Mitsuruloid ragged. It's a moment where Mitsuru herself has let her guard down, and she hasn't been watching because she's run into Kanai's father and Sosuke, and he snuck back into this ARC facility just to get some money he hid behind one of the containers that the ClassicaLoids were held in. And Sosuke's kind of getting the bits and pieces of what all this has meant, and we, the viewer, are as well with those flashbacks, as I say. And we have this penultimate confrontation between Mitsuru and Kanai's father, where she's like, what are you, the gall you have coming back on this turf, after running away? What was that about? And she doesn't get any answers either. But all the while, this Mitsuruloid is starting to crave praise. He's doing a good job, but then he kind of blasts himself, mopping the floor. He trips over himself, whatever it is. Very Sosuke-esque was that happenstance. And everybody in the house, completely 180-degree turn instantly. You suck. You're horrible. You're not any good. You're never going to be any good. Typical Sosuke. And so this thing glitches out. I don't know whether as a result of the water that spilled onto him or that he spilled himself into, arguably tripping over his feet and headlong into the bucket. I don't know what prompted the glitch, but for all intents and purposes, here is this robot becoming like a sonic cannon, repeating the phrase, praise me, praise me, praise me, so loud. It's shattering windows, it's shattering glass, lamps, all this kind of stuff. It's almost making people's ears bleed which is, again, almost Sosuke-esque with the very poor writing of his music. You know? And this thing just goes on the run, goes on the attack, and this is where that confrontation eventually comes in. All of our players just happen to converge on the same point. You know, Motz and Bach-sama are curious what the hell's going on. You know, Sosuke himself with Kanai's father is curious what's going on. And all the ClassicaLoids and Kanai have followed this ravaging Sosuke, wondering what the hell's going on. So here we have Beethoven and Motz calling forth their music, and doing so masterfully so for the first time ever, which the other ClassicaLoids, as I say, took note of. And then Bach-sama, you know, completely wipes that away and seemingly destroys this robot, or at least knocks it out temporarily. And when everyone's not looking, both he and, I don't know whether Mitsuru was on the scene or not, but, like, you know, the robot's gone. They're all like, what's happening? And Kanai has this bomb drop realization when she's looking down at, for all intents and purposes, what she believes to be dead Sosuke. The real Sosuke comes walking up. And he's like, what? What's the problem? And they're all like, well, who is that? And then he's gone. So it just astounds me how back on track we have gotten to that main enigmatic plot line, answering all the things I wanted, while also retaining all of the madcap absurdity that is, you know, the sort of given for this series with everything. Here is this robot running amok. What is the purpose of the robot? The purpose of the robot is to answer the purpose of the ClassicaLoids, which they have not as yet lived up to, which is the, you know, attaining these 8 sounds, these 8 given sounds. Answering to my speculation, you know, there was a method to the madness, all of the insanity of the last few episodes, those little sort of kernels of you know, the rejuvenation of the ClassicaLoids, the, you know, humanitarian sort of, you know, rationalizing usage of the music on Beethoven's part, and you know, all this stuff, like, it was all done for a grand purpose. And that grand purpose, now that we've had a lot of these, you know, questions answered, where has Kanai's father been? Why has he been in hiding? You know, why did he create the ClassicaLoids? Why did he leave with Beethoven and Mozart? Why did he spirit away in the middle of the night with them? Was it something that, you know, Bach-sama was after? Well, we know now that it was. But why? What is his reasoning? Is it something benevolent? Isn't something to save the world? You know, create an abundance of food so that starvation is wiped out, or create an abundance of, you know, joy through music so that nobody is ever depressed again? Is it something benevolent in nature like that? Or is it a level of mind control and having people bow to his whim and his prowess and his power and his manipulation? Something very nefarious. It remains to be seen. But for whatever reason, we know now that Kanai's father did not like what he was hearing, did not like the idea of being associated with this. He'd rather spend his money and live comfortably. And he went on, you know, the run, for all intents and purposes. And the ClassicaLoids, they've run amok. They just haven't answered to whatever it was that their initial purpose was meant to be. Created in partnership by Kanai's father and Mitsuru. And Mitsuru created this, you know, Mitsuru-Loid, after creating the virtual Archidol app, to further the progress along of trying to attain whatever it is Bach-sama is after, whatever the reason is he wants to encapsulate these 8 sounds. And so this episode just rocked my world with all of that stuff. And I really can't wait to get to the next one, because looking at the PV, it just looks like some more absurdity is about to occur. It almost looks like a virtual environment. They're like in the mountains and they're encountering creatures and animals and things like that. It's like, okay, whatever that's going to be about. But I mean, if you've been invested in this series, and I'm just so happy that a lot of my speculations, even going back to the earliest discussions of this series, back before it was on camera for them, you know, a lot of that stuff has been answered, and it turned out I speculated right. I speculated correctly. I got, you know, hit the nail on the head with a lot of the points that I put forth and assumed might be the case. And now really we just have to answer what exactly it is that Bach-sama is after, why he's after these 8 sounds, what the purposes of them will be when conjoined, you know, everything like that. When manipulated by him, it's just so astounding. And to have a series like this with these wacky, endearing characters who, again, hearkening back to the classical music of old, the composers of old, what we learn about them. And I had a great discussion with one of you guys in the comments in my previous episode discussion video, talking about Schubert and how Schubert deserves, in a manner of speaking, to find out how appreciated he is. It is kind of a punchline for him to constantly being like, see me senpai, notice me senpai with Beethoven. But it's kind of at a lack of appreciating the real composer that Schubert was. And they had these, sort of Schubert appreciation meetings where people would play his music, even back during the time that he was alive. Sometimes he would participate in them, sometimes he would not. This was something that, in the conversation I had with one of you guys, you gave me the heads up on, I had not been familiar with. And I kind of equated it for those who are vaguely or not at all familiar with Doctor Who. There was an episode where it was called Vincent and the Doctor, who is a time-traveling alien, had gone back in time and met with Vincent van Gogh, this grand artist, and after some wackiness ensued with a giant monster in the past and everything like that, because of the mental illness that Van Gogh was racked with, he would eventually take his life. Before culminating, the Doctor would take him to, modern time and bring him to a museum where he would be told of how enriched the world was by his artistry, by his craft, which he thought in the time he was living, he was spurned for. They thought he was a lazy bum. They thought he would never be anything, amount to anything, that he was wasting his time painting. And he found out so much about how the world revered him. And it was a very heartbreaking, heartening, bittersweet episode that really just got my tears flowing when he had that realization that he was appreciated. And in talking about the idea that Schubert has not really been so appreciated in this show, I would love to see an awareness brought to him where he can overcome this, very much nipping at the coattails of Beethoven and find for himself his own self-satisfaction to see what he has accomplished in his life, to be able to appreciate his own craft and artistry and everything like that. I would love that. I think a series like this could certainly pull that off, and it would do it believably and masterfully so. Remains to be seen if we'll get that, but I'm so happy with everything we got in this episode, and I couldn't have asked for more along those lines. Answering to that original plot line, all of that mystery, all of that stuff, everything with Kanai's father and Bach-sama and this Mitsuru woman, and, bringing it all back full circle with, again, the virtual Archidol app and this now ClassicaLoid and seeking these 8 sounds. It all, again, revolves around what is Bach-sama after? What is his purpose for doing this? Amidst all the wackiness, amidst the great ClassicaLoids, these classical composers, all of these heartening and hilarious characters, pitch perfect episode. And I can't wait to see how we're going to round out the series with the last handful of episodes we have oncoming. So I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of episode 18 of ClassicaLoid, if you've seen it as well, if you were as impressed with it as I was, if you were as happy as I was, that we got back to all of those mysterious elements and all of those overhanging questions. And, whether or not you have any further speculations on where you think it's going to go, what you think Bach-sama's really after. Is it for something nefarious? Is it for something benevolent? Anything, any insights you have, any opinions you have, thoughts, speculations, always are welcome in the comments below. Love it or hate it, anything goes in the comments below. Just love having that conversation. And so, yeah, otherwise that'll be pretty much it for me on this. If this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.